Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Yesterday I had thought about tackling this one, but decided not to because I felt that the video about black businesses and black customers was long enough as was, and I didn't want to go off on a tangent. But after checking out Your World's channel, I figured I might as well go ahead and throw in my 2 cents as well. And by the way, if you haven't been going by channels like Your World, Tari and Rain Reloaded, and Lisa Cabrera, you really are missing out. First thing we need to remember is we're up against an organized offense. And just to remind you that we have no friends, you remember this creep, VJ Chokal Ingram? He's Mindy Kaling's brother. Now, he's the child of immigrants, and just like Kamala Harris, his folks came here from India after black people kicked open the door for him and made it possible for them to get here. This guy has been kissing white racist behinds extra hard for several years now. He's been spending the last 8 years pushing the lie extra hard that he was getting doors slammed in his face when he applied to colleges and universities as an Indian American. As an Indian American, he wasn't being let in because his grades were just too good. He wasn't considered downtrodden enough. But when he lied and claimed that he was a black student, all of a sudden the doors swung open. He was suddenly getting accepted. At least that's what he's been falsely claiming. But of course, all of that was a lie. He never actually gave any corroborating information other than his word, and what information is known disproves his lie about his would-be black privilege. He claimed that when he was identifying himself as an Indian American, he was getting turned down by colleges and universities, but that's not true. He never actually sent any applications identifying himself as an Indian American. He only sent applications that identified himself as black. Get that? He lied and claimed that he got different results when he identified himself as black, but the truth is he never sent any applications identifying himself as Indian American. So it's a lie for him to claim that he was getting different results when he identified himself as black when he never identified himself as anything but black. Secondly, he applied to 22 schools, but he only got admitted to 1. So once again, the doors didn't swing open for him at all. He got into St. Louis Medical University. That was the only school he could manage to get into. That's it. He didn't get into Harvard or Yale or Princeton, no Ivy League schools, in fact, no great schools at all. And yet, that's where racist propagandists like Ed Blum claim that the main racism against non-black applicants is taking place. Anytime you see the anti-affirmative action crisis actors on TV, they make sure to go to Harvard or Yale, because those are the places the white media would be interested in putting their cameras. But what about this VJ clown? His inferior grades made it where he couldn't get into either one of those schools. And just to show that this was all nothing more than an attention-seeking grift by this VJ clown, he dropped out of St. Louis University after only 2 years. This guy is a fraud and a failure. And like all failures, he looks to blame his inferiority on someone else. No one has denied him anything. In fact, his being Indian American has only helped him. But this is what he has to do because he has no other skills. Now, if this VJ clown wants to talk about academic frauds, he should look closer to home. We have it documented that Asian students like VJ have had entire college admissions fraud rings going for many years. They pay money to get their academically inferior applications accepted. Black students earn their grades honestly. But the white and increasingly Asian legacy admissions makes it where people can buy their way into schools, and no matter how many college cheating scandals there are, we see the white right attacking only black people and the white left remaining silent while they do it. Again, we are up against an organized offense. Both the white left and the white right are entirely dependent on the system of racial goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that gives them every crumb of their daily bread. And when black people are allowed to compete, they start losing. This VJ clown hasn't been heard from much since his attention-whoring stunt years ago, though he has resurfaced like a dog poop in a sewer, along with another walking bowel movement, Ed Blum. So we see that trash of a feather flocks together. For the new folks here, Ed Blum is a right-wing activist who manufactures lawsuits meant to attack the black community. That's who all of his lawsuits are against. It doesn't accomplish anything, though it does delight other racists, and as we all know, you can monetize racism. See, Ed Blum gets millions, you heard me right, millions of dollars from wealthy racist white donors to carry out these nuisance suits, and in return he goes and manufactures lawsuits that these wealthy white interests want to see. This is how this parasite lives. Race hustlers like Ed Blum and Stephen Miller use these racial lawsuits as a way to get money from fellow white supremacists with deep pockets. Like VJ Chokal, Ed Blum is also a complete failure. He tried and failed to be some bigwig on Wall Street. That didn't work. He also tried and failed to become a member of Congress, too. He lost that election to a black candidate, and he lost by a wide margin. Obviously, he's been nursing a grudge ever since, because black people were the ones who killed his would-be political career. This is what these white supremacists think. They have just absolutely psychopathic entitlement. They think they're entitled to things. They don't have to work for anything. It should just be handed to them because they're white. And when they don't get it, they decide to go on some sort of racial jihad about it. This is the origin of Ed Blum's crusade against black people. This is where his little personal race war against the black community started. Black people were the ones who handed him a humiliating defeat, who destroyed his would-be political career in just soul-crushing fashion. So he's decided that he's going to be trying to strike back at black people in the courts ever since. Ed Blum is not a sane person. This guy is deranged. This is somebody who flipped his lid because black people kicked him in the keister and sent him packing. And because he couldn't accept the fact that he just wasn't good enough to get into public office, he's been doing everything that he can to attack the black community ever since. Because he's a failure. And you'll notice this is what VJ Chokal and Christopher Rufo and Ed Blum all have in common. A brotherhood of failure. Failures handed to them by the black community. And failures that, as far as they're concerned, they just can't swallow the fact that they had to take that L because they consider black people to be beneath them, and yet black people were the ones who denied them what they wanted. So now they've decided, well, we're going to attack the black community and try to see if we can deny them something. This is spiteful, it's sick, but it also shows you this is the evil of white supremacy. This is the evil of anti-black racism. No matter what these racist reprobates claim, they don't do this as any sort of calling or because they think it's right. They do it because there's plenty of easy money to be made attacking the black community. For years, Ed Blum has been carrying out a far-right agenda of recruiting white students and claiming a phony racial grievance on their behalf in court. He spent years filing nuisance suits against the University of Texas, making the false claim that white students were being disadvantaged somehow by black students merely being on campus, and his lawsuits failed. He hasn't really had any success until the last few years. Why? Because Donald Trump front-loaded the federal courts with Federalist Society flunkies, and of course the Supreme Court is now infested with them. To understand why Ed Blum's nuisance suits have suddenly gotten traction in the federal courts, you need to understand the Federalist Society. One of the main problems that the white right has had since the days of Franklin Roosevelt is that federal judges refuse to ignore the law and just hand down rulings based on political ideology. Republican presidents like Eisenhower and Nixon had put federal judges on the bench, but those judges didn't ignore the law, and that infuriated the white right because ever since Roosevelt, Democratic politicians had been forming the nation's laws at the federal level. Remember, Democrats controlled Congress for 50 years after Roosevelt took office. They only lost control of Congress in 1994. So, for most of the 20th century, the federal courts were the only place Republicans had a hope of influencing the laws since they couldn't get control of Congress. And fortunately for them, the president is the one who nominates federal judges, including the Supreme Court. Republicans were thoroughly frustrated, though, with how the federal judges they put on the bench still handed down rulings based on the law and not political leanings. Even the judges who Richard Nixon put on the bench refused to do his bidding. That changed when Ronald Reagan took office, and the white right formulated a plan. Previously, judges were selected by the president based on years of experience on the bench. What the white right wanted were racist ideologues who they had in their pocket from the day they entered law school. So, in 1984, a number of white right-wing interests put their money together and started the Federalist Society. Now, the Federalist Society is basically a cabal of right-wing extremist lawyers. That's what they mainly concern themselves with, law. They started off on certain college campuses, particularly these law schools, and they sought out students from conservative families to join their gang. And then they encouraged these college conservatives to run for political office, or to put their names into consideration for federal judgeships. We're talking about people like Robert Bork and Antonin Scalia. Scalia, by the way, would give lectures on behalf of the Federalist Society back in the 80s. Of course, Clarence Thomas was another one who was aligned with these creeps, along with Sam Alito. For decades now, whenever a Republican president was in office, the Federalist Society would submit a list of nominees for that president to appoint to the federal bench. If someone was a Federalist Society member, they could be absolutely counted on to ignore the law and just toe the line for the white right. In other words, they could be counted on to be judicial activists and legislate from the bench, the very thing that they falsely accuse their political opponents of. Federal judgeships are for life, so it's not like there's a ton of openings for those positions, but after 40 years now, with the Reagan, Bush, Bush 45, and Trump administrations, Republicans have now had enough time to get their Federalist Society operatives into a numerical majority of federal courtrooms, and now the Supreme Court. And as we've seen in the last few years, they've made a show of their bias and prejudice. They don't even bother to cite a legal or legislative justification for their rulings, as we saw in Shelby v. Holder. They just say that they don't like something, so they're striking it down. That's why Clarence Thomas felt so emboldened when, after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, he said, now we need to go revisit our ruling that legalized gay marriage. This is how Ed Blum went from taking L after L to miraculously having success all of a sudden. Because the same white, wealthy, racist donors who have funded the Federalist Society are also the exact same ones who give money to Republican politicians, and they're the same ones who gave millions of dollars to Ed Blum's little scam. Okay, now you understand how Ed Blum's sudden judicial success was engineered. Let me tell you how it is that he manufactures lawsuits. Ed Blum, on behalf of his wealthy white donors, goes and looks for some law or some other issue concerning black people that his paymasters want to see overturned or struck down. And to show you how blatantly phony his race grievance is, in the University of Texas fraud case he was pushing years ago, he recruited a young woman to be his plaintiff. Her name was Abigail Fisher. She wasn't looking to file a lawsuit. Ed Blum and his white donors were. They just needed someone to act as their proxy. Abigail is the daughter of one of Ed Blum's friends. This friend knew that Blum was out auditioning and looking for someone to manufacture a lawsuit on behalf of so he could attack college admissions. So Ed Blum's friend said, hey, how about my daughter? This is where Ed Blum's nuisance suits against the University of Texas came from. A friend of his saying, hey, let me lend you my daughter for a while so she can go ahead and sign her name to these nuisance suits. This is how this guy's been doing this. And by the way, if somebody claims to be a friend of Ed Blum, you already know that they're a certified right-wing wacko activist too. So Blum had been advertising that he was looking for someone white who would be willing to lend their name to his scam. He tried it though, and it failed, at least back then. So years later, he decided to use a new tact, and he would use Asian students as his stalking horse. And that ploy would have failed too, except that now there's a much more corrupt judiciary for him to work with. All of those Federalist Society operatives who the Republicans have been filtering in over the last 40 years have finally begun to pay off. But even so, this tactic only has a limited shelf life. They've only got a small amount of time before these Federalist Society shills inevitably age out or retire, so this is pretty much the last and only time that they're going to have this opportunity. It couldn't be more obvious that Ed Blum is fabricating lawsuits. In a working justice system, he would have long ago been deemed a vexatious litigant and barred from bringing any more of his nuisance suits. Now, just to show that there's been a program at work here, after Ed Blum's little lawsuit against college admissions, he immediately pivoted to go after any and all companies that give any sort of funding to black businesses. Anyone who gives scholarships that are earmarked specifically for black students. That's been his next little line of attack. Most recently, he's filed a lawsuit against Fearless Fund, a venture capitalist fund run by black women which gives funding to black women-owned businesses. Blum is up to his old tricks again, finding and recruiting proxies to be his sock puppet plaintiffs for the next racially based lawsuits. In this case, he had a white guy who runs a tiny trucking company, and this guy claimed that he had tried to apply for a grant from Fearless Fund, but he stopped when he realized this grant was only for black business owners. He claims he wants to file a class action lawsuit and get damages for everyone who has suffered unlawful racial discrimination from this nefarious, huge financial concern. These racist pukes lay it on thick, don't they? This guy apparently didn't realize that the Fearless Fund gives grants to black women's businesses until he was already in the middle of applying for it. Does anyone truly believe that? Now, the talking point that they're trying to use in court is that these grants violate the Civil Rights Act of 1861. Yes, you heard that right, 1861. And what they're claiming is that law deals with racial discrimination in contracts, and well, if you're giving any sort of money to a black business, that constitutes a contract, except it doesn't. The money given by Fearless Fund and other venture capitalist groups to these black businesses are not contracts, they're grants. You see, a contract requires a quid pro quo. Someone is getting money in exchange for performing specific services on behalf of the person giving them the money. Fearless Fund doesn't do that, and as the right-wing Supreme Court certified with their Citizens United ruling, money is free speech. So any attempts to try to tell them what to do with their money violates their free speech, at least it would, except you have these Federalist Society shills who are on the bench, and they would say, well, we're white and we say that it isn't free speech. See, this isn't about law. There are a bunch of scholarships and venture capitalist groups that give money specifically to Asian businesses, specifically to Hispanic businesses. Hell, you had Asians talking about during the COVID lockdowns that they needed money specifically earmarked for them. And where was Ed Blum at to say you can't do that? No lawsuits on that one. So we see what this is really about. This is about attempting to put a chilling effect on any businesses that do grants for black businesses, any venture capitalist firms, the few who actually do give money to black businesses, or for anybody who has scholarships or any sort of money that is earmarked for black people. This is meant to try to scare people through the threat of litigation. And make no mistake, what Blum is doing is pushing an anti-black agenda. Everything he files lawsuits about specifically has to do with black people and black people only. Now, when somebody tries to tell you that nobody's holding black businesses back, that nobody's targeting black people, you mention Ed Blum to them. When anyone tries to tell you that there's no organized, well-funded operation specifically meant to attack black people, you mention his name. This is how the affirmative action ruling came to be this year. It was a political operation engineered by wealthy white right-wing donors, using their money to install puppet judges on the bench and then to pay their flunky Ed Blum to file lawsuits with these Federalist Society stooges in the courtroom. And they will act as a rubber stamp committee all the way up to the Supreme Court. Any judge who is a Federalist Society member or who has ever been recommended by them should be barred from federal office and should probably be disbarred from practicing law. People who take oaths to ignore the Constitution and who pledge to ignore the law have no business making rulings about it. And if Ed Blum's racist program sounds familiar, it should. You won't be surprised to learn that many of the same wealthy white racist donors who fund his nuisance suits are also the same people who fund and prop up Christopher Rufo. The entire moral panic that he put forward about critical race theory was entirely a right-wing think tank-funded operation. It wasn't grassroots any more than Ed Blum is. And like VJ Chorrell, Chris Rufo is also a total failure. He tried for years to become the next Dinesh D'Souza making propaganda films, but he failed at that. He tried to be some sort of half-baked academic, but he wasn't smart enough for that either. So just like VJ, he resorted to the old standby. Become a mouth-frothing liar railing against black people, because everybody knows there's always someone willing to throw you a few crumbs for that. Now, I want to know, where's the Biden administration at while this is going on? Where are the corrupt and comatose minions of Merrick Garland at? Biden's administration had no problem filing an amicus brief to cheer on the right-wing Supreme Court, greatly reducing Miranda warning protections. So Biden's just fine having the feds weigh in on cases so long as it wouldn't benefit black people. Learn to recognize when you're up against an organized offense. Black voters are the backbone of the Democratic Party. Though the Democrats have spent the last few years giving insincere praise and lip service to black women in specific, well, here you have racist white activists attacking black women openly, and the Democrats are silent about it. When Clarence Thomas made one off-color remark about overturning the Supreme Court's gay marriage ruling, Democrats broke their necks to write a federal gay marriage law overnight. Now you have right-wing nuts attacking black people in the courts, and Democrats have done nothing about it. They don't talk about it, they don't propose any legislation, not even so much as a buy your leave. So the most important crucial constituency of the Democratic Party is being attacked and assailed by a racist operation, and Democrats do nothing. The LGBT community, which is far smaller and doesn't have the numbers or the money to affect the outcome of even one election, and Democrats bend over backwards to make sure nobody tries to mess with them. Remind me again why black people should vote for the Democrats? We have an unholy alliance of anti-black forces who are attacking us. A lot of black people like to talk about allies and how we need to care when everyone else is being attacked, but I'd like to know, where's Jonathan Greenblatt and the ADL at? Where have they been to call out Ed Blum? Who from the ADL has denounced him? Who from the ADL has put their money and their legal muscle behind fighting his anti-black crusade? For all you people who talk about alliances, an alliance cannot only go one way. Attacking black people is the only thing the Ed Blums and VJ Chorals can agree on, and they have widespread support from their respective camps. Theirs is very much a community effort. So the next time somebody calls themselves running up in your face telling black people that we have to show sympathy and support for fill in the blank, you just remind them about this. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Bo Eldridge McLean, Creighton Consulting, Sabrina, Mike Hughes, and Carl Martin. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.